So, I recently beat Metroid Prime Remastered during the creation of the last Metroid video, and like I said there, it truly is a phenomenal game. And if you haven't tried it out already, I highly recommend you do, as it can definitely go head to head with many modern AAA games today. But obviously with me beating it, I started to get an itch for more. Now, granted, I do plan to 100% it, as it seems to be one of the easier games to 100% in the series, but let's be honest, a new game would be much more preferred. Ever since we got the announcement of Metroid Prime Remastered, another major question quickly arose. Will we also be getting remasters of Primes 2 and 3? It's a question a lot of people have had on their minds going into 2024. If you had asked me at the beginning of the year, hell, before the last Direct, I would have told you that it would have been more likely for us to get announcements of Prime 2 and 3 remastered rather than anything in regards to Prime 4. Keep in mind that I believe Prime 4 was guaranteed for the Switch 2 prior to the Direct, cross-gen or not. But now that we have some sort of concrete release schedule for Prime 4, with it being scheduled to release in 2025, there has been some doubts about the likelihood of us getting Prime 2 and 3 remastered. If you ask me, I still believe that these remasters are definitely on the way, and there's plenty of reasons as to why this is, chief among them being the fact that there's no other way to play Primes 2 or 3 without resorting to the aftermarket. The popular consensus about the Prime remasters is that they were always meant to come out before Prime 4 in order to bring players back up to speed with the series. I also think it would be a really weird look if by the time Prime 4 releases, we only have Primes 1 and 4 readily available, with fans having to resort to dumping a bunch of money into eBay just to play the middle two games. Rumors about these remasters have existed for almost as long as our knowledge of Prime 4's existence, but they did ultimately end up being true. At least when we talk about the first one. And when looking back at those rumors from years ago, despite there being two primary classes of thought, both sides did agree that we would have some way to play all three of these games on the Switch, whether that be through a bundle of all three games together or all as separate individual releases. Now, obviously with us having the first Prime game as an individual release, I think it's safe to say that Primes 2 and 3 will also be individual releases, because, let's be real, how weird would it be if Nintendo just released 2 and 3 as a bundle? But I am not here to convince you on whether or not we're getting Primes 2 and 3 remastered, because, come on, we totally are. Rather, I'm here to explain when exactly we're getting them. Now, a great start is obviously this snippet from the Prime 4 trailer, which gives us an obvious baseline for when we should expect these prior entries. I know some people will argue that we could get them after the fact, but if Pikmin, a game series where story is extremely minimal, is able to accomplish it, then I think the story-heavy Metroid Prime can do it too. Also, there's like 4 entries in each. So then if we can make the case that 1, we're getting these, and 2, they could and should come out before the 4th game releases, what time frame could we be looking at? I personally believe that just as we're not getting a bundle of 2 and 3 together, I don't think they will be announced and released at the same time either. These two, I believe, will end up being two distinct and somewhat spread apart releases. If we take into account how Prime 1 Remastered was announced and released, then I think it would be safe to assume a similar strategy will be used for Primes 2 and 3. Now, for those who don't remember, allow me to refresh your memory. Metroid Prime Remastered was announced and subsequently released digitally on February 8th, 2023 during that year's designated Winter Direct. If you've watched me discuss this before, you already know that I have always found this reveal to be extremely weird. This was the first time we heard or saw anything official from Nintendo about this remaster at all. They announced it and then immediately released it, and I wouldn't be surprised if we got the same thing for Prime 2 and Prime 3. Let's be honest, these are GameCube games, and I think most people would agree that the 6th generation of consoles was the start of the modern gaming era we've been living in for the past 2 decades, so besides an HD coat of paint and some slight modifications, there isn't that much work that needs to be done. It's also important to consider that out of all 3 of these games, the only one Nintendo would have logically drawn out is the first one, and considering we got a same-day announcement and release for that, it's almost 100% guaranteed the same will be done for 2 and 3. So then, when are we getting them? If we take that same-day direct release into account, then all we have to worry about is when the Switch 2 will release. All we know at this point in time is that it will be released between April of 2025 and March of 2026. Other than this year, Nintendo Directs have stayed relatively consistent since 2021. Typically we get 3 a year, one in the winter, one in the summer, and one in the fall. The fall and summer Directs are always the most consistent, with us almost always getting one in June and one in September, and this is where I think we'll end up getting a reveal and release for Metroid Prime 2 Remastered. Although we only got one Direct so far this year, I find it extremely hard to believe that we won't get another Direct before the end of the year. And when looking at all three Direct types, the September Fall Directs are always the most consistent by far. I think it's also safe to assume that this Direct will also not be as big as many others, mainly because of the Switch 2. I think if anything, the big highlights of this Direct will be more in-depth looks at Prime 4, Mario & Luigi, and Mario Party Jamboree. Anything beyond that I think will be saved for when we do get a Switch 2 presentation. And I think we'll end up seeing a similar case for the Winter 2025 Direct. Now, these are a little more difficult to pinpoint because they can be anywhere from January to March, although modern March Directs are pretty rare. No matter where this Direct does end up falling, it'll still be ahead of the earliest possible release for the Switch 2 by at least a month. Again, I think an almost identical situation is going to occur for Prime 3 Remastered as well. The only thing is figuring out when the Winter Direct will take place, and honestly, it's wholly dependent on when the Switch 2 is set to release. And also, any scenario in which this is announced during the Summer Direct is almost certainly impossible. Let's refresh. I strongly believe that we will get Prime 2 Remastered announced and released with the upcoming September Direct, and Prime 3 Remastered with our first Direct of 2025, which at the latest would be mid-February, giving players enough time to catch up before Prime 4's release sometime later in 2025. I know this proposed timeline does have all three games release in less than a year from each other, which is an insane prospect for Metroid fans, but honestly, Nintendo is cutting it close as it is. And let's also keep in mind that Prime 2 and 3 are just remasters at the end of the day. But I know some people will ask, why doesn't Nintendo just put these remasters on the Switch too? Hell, I even alluded to it in my last Metroid video. Well, as of the making of this video, Metroid Prime 4 is still a Switch exclusive game. But Aidan, I hear you ask, didn't you dedicate a whole video to explaining why Prime 4 is definitely going to be a cross-gen game? And yes, I did, and I still hold that to be very true. But one thing I forgot to mention is that if Prime 4 is a cross-gen game, it will most certainly be a launch title for the Switch too, just like Breath of the Wild was for the Switch. Because, let's be honest, how weird would it be if we got Prime 4 and the Switch 2 both in 2025, but they don't release on the same day? And it's because of that that these two remasters need to be on the Switch. Obviously to release before Prime 4, but also to have them all in one place for players as well. And if this timeline does end up being true, then we as Metroid fans are looking forward to an absolutely amazing next few months.
Sir, boss man, what are you gonna find here?
Absolutely nothing.